Salvis Search for the Universe, Chapter 11, Part 3. The air was still and stagnant. There were no sounds, no bird calls, no buzz of insects. There was nothing but an overwhelming wall of noise, washing over them like surf on stone. It pulled and pulsed like a beating heart deep in the forest, drawing its blood to the core. His name was not Brandelcuff, nor was it Felix. He had no name. He was an organism stripped of all its complexity, and reduced to but one compulsion: to walk towards that which calls him. He nursed the pleasure that sat in his brain like a pinch on the back of his neck. His face was fixed with a rictus grin. His eyes were hollow and focused on something miles away. Something walked by his side, but it did not matter. The forest was devoid of life, and even the green trees appeared to be dead and colorless. He walked and walked and walked. There was no pain. There was no fear. There was nothing except pleasure and lust. He could feel himself growing closer, closer. His grin grew wider. The pleasure grew and grew to rapturous heights that pounded him in waves and threatened to melt him into a hot, gibbering mess. He was getting close. He was almost there. The excitement was unbearable. He wanted to sprint, but his legs would not let him. They kept the same agonizingly slow pace. Why wouldn't they let him move faster? It took an eternity, but he finally found it. He passed the trees, leaped over fallen logs, his heart throbbed with anticipation. He could feel it. It was right around the corner. He stepped through a hedge, and there it was. His soul orgasmed at the sight. It sat in the crook of a rotten tree. 13 horns sprung from its beautiful elk skull-like face. An endless stream of delectably pestilent discharge leaked from its mouth. The unearthly melody seemed to arise not from its maw, but from the piping of some unknown bodily organ. So covered was its body with red and brown moss that it had the appearance of an upright bear, despite its alluringly emaciated figure. It stood, creaking, raising one of its 2 long arms, and crooked a knobby finger coquettishly. His heart jumped for joy. He strode over to the magnificent creature, as quick as his legs could carry him, which was the same agonizingly mechanical pace as before, and came before it. The other creature that had been by his side came too. It looked them over with empty sockets, and sent the other one away. It had chosen him. His ecstasy was indescribable. The haunting melody suffusing the forest settled to a low buzz, from mind blasting to merely mind numbing. He felt his limbs again. He could move, but why would he want to? His whole life, everything up to this point, was purely so he could meet this creature. He was sure of it. It caressed his cheek and hinged its toothy maw, dripping fluids onto his face. It burned like acid, but he could endure anything for the sake of this wondrous creature. Its sinewy arms travelled sensuously down his neck and shoulders, finally settling on his heart. Something was being sucked out of him, and it felt like an endless ejaculation. Its jaws clicked and chattered. Something protruded from its skull, growing amongst its 13 brothers, as it grew like a limbless tree. His face grew wan and haggard, his cheeks shrinking as the life was sucked out of him. It was absolute heaven. He loved this creature with all his heart. He loved it so much, he wanted to give something back. That marvelous melody it sang, it was the most beautiful thing he had ever heard. It was a sound he was looking for, but he never knew it. He grabbed his lute, poked out the mud and drained the water, then held it to his chest and let his fingers fly. His soul, his everything flowed down his arms and into his lute. He played like he had never played before, and even when the creature shoved him in the chest and onto his back, he did not stop. He had to give this creature everything he had, and he had one thing more important to him than his life, and that was his music. It plugged its ears and let out a metallic shriek. It cringed and curdled, stumbling back at the waves of sound, beating upon it like wind in a hurricane. Its own piping melody could not compete with the ear-rending disaster that clamoured like the descent into hell itself. It tilted its head to the sky and belted out another series of avian screeches and fled, clearing 10 feet each stride. The fog reduced. Sun filtered through the green leaves. A bird called from somewhere. Whatever unholy force had gripped the forest slacked and died away. Brandelcuff still played on. He played until he was drenched in sweat and his arms went numb.
Stop!
Salvi begged for mercy from somewhere to the side, gripping her head as if to stave off a bad headache.
No more music!
He stopped with a plunk.
What?
He realized he was looking up to the sky.
What happened? Where am I?
He sat up, his head flicking side to side in confusion, then took his turn to grip his head. It throbbed like a second heart. He felt absolutely terrible.
Why, Brandelcuff make music? Salvi head hurt.
She moaned as if she had woken up the morning after, downing an entire barrel of ale.
I remember hearing something wonderful and wanted to play along. Salvi remember hearing terrible sound.
And considering all the information, the source of that sound was undoubtedly Brandelcuff.
What? Terrible? That was the best I've ever played.
He scoffed, but he supposed that was the limit of taste of a non-human. She could just never understand true music. Salvis finally seemed to look around.
How we end up here? Well, I don't know. Perhaps it's because we've been lost out here for weeks and we're finally going stir crazy. Lord knows I'm already going mad.
He waved his arms flamboyantly, then smacked his lips. All that shouting had made him thirsty. He went to take a drink from the lute, and then remembered.
Oh, that's just wonderful. Don't suppose you think there's a stream around here somewhere?
She didn't reply.
Salvi?
She was looking down.
This road?
She pointed at a rough dirt path as wide as a man's foot. It was one of the roughest, most beaten-up trails you could find in a forest, but it was a trail nonetheless.
Why, yes. Yes, it is a road of sorts.
He stared blankly. He was too shocked by disbelief to put an emotion into his words, but on the inside his guts were doing somersaults and 10-point pirouettes. Promptly he puked in glee.
Where's my walking stick?